I'm Helen Norbury, and this is Becoming Unapologetically Me, the show all about authentic self-expression with expert guests from the fields of health, leadership, and mindset. This show is here to show you that you don't need to conform to the expectations that friends, family, and society have of you. And actually, what we can unearth when we find the courage to become the unapologetic version of who we are. Grab a cup of coffee and get your notepad out for this week's episode. Hello, and welcome back to Becoming Unapologetically Me. Today, I'm really excited to talk to Jesse Glaze. And I don't suppose that the subject of shame is the sort of thing that gets most people excited, but hey, I'm a massive Brené Brown fangirl, and I love talking about, understanding, and uncovering shame. So when Jesse and I started chatting about having a conversation about unshaming, let's just say it was a no-brainer. So it's amazing to welcome you here today, Jesse. And I know you've got a whole bunch of different qualifications and experiences in the world of psychology, somatics, trauma-informed coaching. So I'm sure you could choose from any raft of different specialties that you'd want to work in. So can you start by telling me what it is about the subject of shame that so inspires you?
So let me start a little bit back. Shame is an emotion that is designed to stop you from moving. It's a really important thing in childhood. And if you've ever had a toddler, hung out with a toddler, if you yell right before they stick their finger in a socket, they will stop and get this shocked look on their face. And that's the experience of shame. It is a protective mechanism. But what I've seen, I've worked with clients of all ages in a few different specialties, like you said, and it continues to stop us. Often when it's something that we're perceiving as scary, even if that thing is what's going to benefit us most.
Yeah.
And so this idea of removing that shame, of recognizing you're not a toddler anymore, the scary thing isn't going to be a finger in a socket. It's going to be taking a leap of faith or trusting yourself more or moving forward with intimacy or taking a step that's scary or painful, doing things that are going to help you grow. So when we can unshame that process, we're able to move forward with so much more joy and lightness. And I think the more joyful and light people are, the better place the world is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really common theme on this podcast and these conversations, in fact, about, how as children, we're really quite good at joy and having fun and doing all those light things. And then layer after layer after layer kind of arrives in our life for whatever reason. And we bit by bit forget how to or when to have fun of any description, really. So yeah, it's a really interesting point. It's strange, isn't it, as adults, and I'm 48 years old, but so often we're taken back to that 4, 5, 6-year-old version of ourselves that feels that shame all over again. And it was definitely something I wanted to touch on a lot with you today, really, is about how childhood rolls through to adulthood, because I think it's really quite pertinent in the subject of shame. So were there any defining moments in your childhood that you can think of, or in your upbringing, that kind of shaped who you are today, maybe kind of got you interested and curious about the subject of shame?
Absolutely. I can think of more as I was older, looking back, right, than I did in the moment that I recognized. But I know I actually grew up in a household where conflict was pretty rare, but when it happened, it was explosive. And so I learned that, if there's conflict, it's going to be big and scary.
Yeah.
And I spent so long like, we don't do that. And we don't have, and it makes it really difficult to be assertive. It makes it difficult to build intimacy if you're not willing to have difficult conversations. Sure. So, I can remember like a conversation with my parents that got really heated, and they started yelling, and I was like, I'm leaving. And I turned and walked away. And I remember later they both came and they were like, it's okay. We love each other. And they're still together. They do love each other a lot. It was just that they fought so rarely, they weren't very good at it.
Yeah.
And they were not always good at talking through things and making sure we weren't seeing it. And so it resulted in this, oh, wow, like, well, if you are doing those things, if you're having conflict, it's going to get big and scary. And with that came the, okay, so if I'm creating conflict, I'm doing something bad.
Yeah.
And that's really what shame is, right? Is I am bad. I am doing something bad here.
Yeah.
And that was a very big shaping thing. As far as getting like messages about what kind of people fit into our family culture and which didn't as well was a big one. So I know, like, for me, money was a big one because one of my parents grew up with very little and one of my parents grew up fine. And as they moved up, it was like, oh, it's harder and harder. It was very difficult for one of my parents to be around people who had always had money. You know, this, oh, you don't get it.
Yeah.
And I see that with a lot of people, and I totally understand. It's like, you're right. Probably not, right? Like, probably don't get some of the ways that you suffered. But this message that that's a bad thing that you didn't suffer.
Yeah.
And really, it's like, no, that's a huge gift that you can use in a lot of ways to benefit other people. So fewer and fewer people have to suffer.
Yeah.
But I had to work so deeply on layers of shame in that.
Yeah.
So those are the two big ones that really come up, is like learning how to be okay with conflict, learning how to be okay around money were both big areas for me to excavate.
Yeah, I can really resonate with both of those as well, because I think I only heard my parents argue once, and then 2 seconds later, you know, in my perception, 2 seconds later, they had split up. And so, you know, conflict, therefore, did and sometimes still does feel very dangerous and scary. And I think when you were saying that, I was thinking, yeah, we should be taught how to argue constructively. So it's not about yelling and anger and being very, you did this, you did that. But actually, how do we disagree with each other in a constructive way where there's no losers in that conversation? Right. And yeah, it's a really, really interesting point. And yeah, I think whether people have grown up with money or if they've grown up without it, there is often a lot of shame associated around money from whichever angle. It's a very, very interesting discussion. And what you say about conflict actually links really nicely to something I was reading that Brené Brown wrote. I had to get her into this conversation, of course.
Gotta, yeah.
So she says that shame is so painful for children because it's inextricably linked to the fear that we are unlovable. And when you've experienced shame as a child, you know, how do you start to unpack that and to, as an adult, feel worthy of love, feel lovable, feel able to give love, to receive love? You know, they're so, as she says, inextricably linked. How do you start to unpack that?
I think it can be different for every person. And I know that one of the things that I do as a coach is to try to be, for some people, that first person that it's like, I'm not judging. Mm-hmm. And I will sometimes say to people, like, I see them do the pause and the think and the curating the response. I'll say, no, just word vomit at me. Like, I'm not judging. There are no wrong answers. Go.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to see people who are very reserved and introverted just start talking because they've never had that opportunity of like, no, I don't care if you say the wrong thing. Like give me more. I need more information. And even if it's wrong, we can fix it later. And it just opens something. And I've had people show up that way for me. And one of the big things in my life is finding the people that I don't have to censor myself around. And that can mean a lot of different things, but it's like, it's the people where I don't have to pause and curate my response before I answer. And most of the time in society, I do, because not every idea that I have is a good one to say out loud or a good idea. Or, you know, sometimes my immediate knee-jerk reaction is like, no, that's not really kind. And that's not how I want to show up. But having a few people where it's just like, whatever comes up, comes out, really does something to your nervous system to be seen and accepted that way. And I think for a lot of people, especially I know young people usually find it in like a music scene or in a certain group of friends or in, you know, I've seen it in support groups that I've facilitated where sometimes it's just finding one or two people to begin with and figuring out then you start to see what those people look like and how they sound, how they talk, and you can start to pick out, oh, this is somebody that would accept me.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is someone I can feel safe with.
Yeah.
And it makes all the difference.
Yeah. Interestingly, I was just listening to a Simon Sinek interview this morning with Trevor Noah, and it was on exactly this subject, in fact, as to how important friendships are, and actually asking for help creates so much trust, because when you need some help, and that you can trust that friend to be there, to not judge you, to just sit with you in the mess, whatever it may be, and how powerful that is for your nervous system, for all aspects of your life. Not putting all the pressure on a relationship to give you that, but actually having friendships outside of the relationship to kind of take pressure off in different places as well. So it's really interesting that you say that, when I literally just listened to that conversation earlier today as well. So,
and if I may, it ties in to the conflict thing too. Because one of the things that I'll do is, if I'm really mad at my partner, he's not the first person I talk to.
Yeah.
I talk to a close friend that I know won't spill our business. And I'm like, I'm really, really mad. And I talk it through until I realize what the actual problem is.
Yeah.
Because it's never the thing
It's
I
not
think
him.
it is on the surface. It's like, it's always, it's like, you didn't do the dishes. And it's like, no, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's stuff like that where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, he does the dishes 9 out of 10 days. This is the one day and you're going to lose your shit. Right. It's about talking with a friend helps me get to that, where then he and I can actually have a productive conversation instead of a blaming one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so important, because then you lift shame. And for, any young people who might be observing that as well, they're learning then how to manage conflict in a really constructive way. So yeah, that's fantastic. Was there a turning point in your life when things started to shift, or did it just gently evolve? How did you get from that sort of childhood place to the adult version of yourself today?
There were a lot of shifts. A big one was I used to drink a lot to kind of cope with how I was feeling. And I was in denial about that right up until the day that I stopped drinking. And I was like, oh, this is a bigger deal than I thought it was. And that was a huge piece of it, was starting to build a community of people who had chosen not to drink. And I still have a lot of friends that do. And I'm not judging again, right? Like, I'm not shaming anybody for what they choose, but that really helped me learn how I was trying to numb away certain things or trying to avoid certain things, right? Like, it made it very different to build intimacy when there's not a glass of wine first. It made it very different to have an argument, and it made it very different to deal with social anxiety or other areas where I was masking some of this shame, and then I didn't have a mask anymore.
Yeah.
And I started doing a lot more of the somatic work, but it started with yoga and kind of developed from there. And I started doing a lot more shadow work, where I was looking at, okay, what are these things that are causing me shame and why? What are the things that I'm so scared I might be? Let's look at that. And let's kind of like have a conversation with the demons instead of trying to like lock them in a closet. And it really has been an ongoing process since there. And there've been a few big shifts, but I feel like that for me was probably the starting point.
Yeah, I can really resonate with that. I think I stopped drinking about 5 years ago. And yeah, it's been a huge part of my journey as well. So yeah, we can really resonate with that. So I believe that the majority of parents, they do the best that they possibly can as parents. So what are your views on how we help to educate people that the way that we may have been brought up might not be the way that we want to bring our own children up? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I get, well, it didn't do me any harm. And then, like you say, there's a whole catalogue of coping mechanisms that are in place in that person's life. So how do we help people to see that maybe their childhood has shaped their adulthood, and some of this, let's call it dysfunction, we could maybe avoid if we brought our own children up in a slightly different way?
Absolutely. And I think one of the underlying things that I see with bringing up children that I think I'm like, oh, we could be doing this better is making use of our communities. Because raising children is impossible. You can't actually do it by yourself. Like you can't do it perfectly. And one of the most helpful statistics that I ever learned is that if you meet your child's needs 40% of the time, they're unlikely to have like adverse events. It's like, it's not even, such a low bar.
Cool.
But there's, right? But there's so much shame around, like the joke about like the Pinterest mom, and it's got to look like this and it's got to be this. I will say, as far as, oh, it didn't bother me, or, oh, it didn't affect me, or I turned out okay. When I hear that response, what I'm hearing is resistance to a different idea because you didn't.
Yeah.
Where it's because it's always spat at you. It's never like, oh, I think I turned out okay. It's like, well, I turned out okay.
Yes.
Right? Always, always in that defensive, like, how dare you? There is no other way. Because if there were another way, that's so unfair.
Yes.
And it's that resistance to sadness about, hey, it turns out that like, they're not just small adults. Like kids need very different things. And I think a lot of it is having strong boundaries is important for kids.
Yeah.
And that enforcing them does not have to mean being scary. It's not raising your voice necessarily. And actually, sometimes if you whisper, that works just as well. They'll get close to like, oh, she whispered. Like it's like it has the same effect. But it's saying, okay, we can do this. And then like having really direct consequences and being really clear. Because I feel like the act of being a child is like pushing out, trying to find the walls.
Yeah.
Let's see what I can get away with.
Yeah.
And it's what I think a lot of people get wrong about gentle parenting. I have a cousin who actually like teaches gentle parenting. She has a neurodivergent child and he's awesome. And it's not about being permissive. It's about giving explanations and giving reasons. It's never because I said so.
Yeah.
It's, hey, you know what? We do 2 hours of screen time because I want you to continue to play outside. And I don't want, it's better for your brain. It's better for all of our brains if we spend times away from screens. We're done with screen time for today. We'll get to watch more tomorrow. It's okay if you're having big feelings about it, it's like screaming and crying. And it's like, okay, letting them have those big tantrums, big feelings. That's okay. We're not allowed to hurt anybody. We have to be safe with our hands and our feet. Sometimes it'll say if they're really little, like we have to be safe with our hands and our feet. But it's okay that you're having these feelings. I bet that feels really sad. I bet that's hard.
Yeah.
It makes a big difference to validate a kid.
Yeah. And I remember as a child feeling really unsatisfied by the answer because I'm an adult and I get to make the rules around here. And you're right. I've had those same conversations with my children about screens almost exclusively and, about the research behind it and why it's important to give our brains sort of time away from the noise of screens and, all of those things. And I hope that it's a sort of an easier conversation when you can make sense of it. And I haven't just thought about it because I'm being annoying, whatever other reason. And actually that there is hopefully some sense behind what I'm saying, because, it does make a big difference for how a child receives that message.
Absolutely.
So how do you see that experiencing shame as a child then later links to a dysregulated nervous system and maybe even experiencing burnout as an adult? What's that sort of connection between all of those things?
So I think that the big thing is every single time we feel shame as an adult, it brings us back to that little kid feeling, right? Like when you're ashamed, it's like you can immediately go back to like, I hear a lot of middle school locker room as a comment. Like, oh God, I have a body and I don't want anyone to see it and something's wrong with it, right? Especially, I'm sure I was going to say 48. I'm 35, so I really grew up in like the heroin chic era of like everybody's super skinny. And if you're not, like this is wrong with your body and that's wrong with your body. And like Ally McBeal was on television and like, oh my gosh. All of these things that built this idea of, oh, I'm supposed to look a certain way.
Yeah.
And the first time that a teacher told you like, you can't use that language or you can't talk like that, or why would you say that? And it's like, oh, if I say the wrong thing too, then I'm bad and everyone's going to know and everyone's going to see it. And it continues to be that way where it's you're fighting with your partner and they are angry at you about something. And if you get into shame, it's like you just collapse in like, oh God, they're mad at me. And it's the same feeling of a parent yelling at you with your partner. You go back into that little child place. And so it kind of fills throughout life, because then I'll see a lot of people who get that way with their boss, right? They get constructive criticism of any kind. And it's like, oh God, I'm bad. I screwed up by whatever. Or there's a situation where, especially burnout's really common in healthcare, right? Because resources are just not what they need to be to provide the best care for patients. And so you go down,
especially when you're supporting other people with that, probably one of the hardest conversations that they have to process, if there's something that's not great with their health, and you're trying to hold the emotions for that person as well. So it's not just your emotions. There's a lot of emotions to hold in that setting.
Exactly. And it's this, okay, I'm holding emotions for somebody and they're hurting. Maybe they're mad at, and you can experience that as like, I ruined their day, right? Or I ruined their life, and you make it very self-centered, to be honest, that it's about how I'm this terrible, awful thing. And it burns you down and burns you out far faster than if you're able to say like, okay, like I am here as support while you receive this bad news. Or, and being able to come from a place of actual like confidence and a little bit of assuredness of, no, I'm here to support you while you understand this. I'm here to make sure you understand, not I'm here to be like this person who gives you the bad thing. I created the bad thing. I am the bad thing. And that's not the conscious thought, but that's what's happening when you go into shame. I did this. It's my fault. I'm so bad.
Yeah. And that's big and heavy, isn't it? So how do you cushion yourself from the impact of experiencing shame through your somatic practices? You mentioned about yoga and other practices I know that you have as well. So how does that help to cushion you from the impact of shame?
I think that a big one is the more aware I am of my body, the more kind of embodied is the word we use, but like we're all obviously embodied, but it's like being present with it. I can feel it. So when I get shame, it feels heavy right over my breastbone, really. It's not actually my heart, but like right around my heart area,
Yeah.
And I feel that heaviness. And now I'm able to kind of do the somatic practice of like putting my hands there and being like, okay, I believe you, and like feeling it. And if it feels super heavy, I'll push and create that feeling of heaviness. If it feels like it's squeezing, I'll almost give myself a hug and squeeze and kind of recreate and sit with it and breathe with it and notice what intuitive movement my body wants from there. And I'll kind of sway or move or breathe in different ways until it starts to lessen. And I'm able to kind of have that, okay, let's bring this let's bring this to the surface, because usually it's an unconscious thing that's happening. Why do I feel bad about this? Why is this scary? Why is this icky? Because it's usually like fear, disgust, sometimes anger that bring that up. So it's like, okay, why is this scary? Why is this icky? What's going on here? And sometimes it's journaling about it from there. Sometimes it's just moving through. Sometimes it's having that internal conversation, or even if I'm by myself or no one can see that I look crazy, I'll just talk to myself. Like, okay, why is this scary? Why is this icky? And you'd be amazed I get answers, right? That it's like, oh, like it's that, if you will do internal family systems at all, like that inner child part is like, I don't want to be that. Okay. Okay, and it's not, no, it's fine. Because I'll hear that a lot where people are like telling yourself like, it's okay, everything's okay, everything's okay. And that's like just smushing down all of what you're feeling. Instead of being like, okay, tell me more. It's the same way you raise a kid, right? It's reparenting yourself in that situation.
Absolutely. Allowing yourself to feel it. And again, going back to the point we made earlier, not judging it. So it's not wrong to feel that, but just allowing it to happen. And I know I used to judge myself an awful lot for crying and how that was a kind of a weakness in some way. And now I can just kind of okay, something needs to process out. Okay, we're doing this. And, just allowing it to happen without any judgment on myself and just with compassion to whatever that little child needs in that moment. So I know another area that you talk about is how shame gives us, if that's the right word, these self-imposed limitations. So how do you help to lift those so that you can be everything that you want to be everything that you're able to be, just be all of you, basically?
Yeah, this is what like lights me on fire, right? So
I see the
a
smile.
lot of it,
Yeah.
yeah, right. Well, so even you were talking about like the crying without shame, and I think I posted on social media the other day. I was like, I think my new superpower is crying without shaming myself, just bawling it out, and like, there's no shame, there's no need to fix it. It's just what's happening right now, and it's like it's like a weird flex, but that was such a big win.
Yeah.
I so when you're able to actually dialogue with your shame and your fears, especially,
Mm.
the biggest thing that blocks limitations is saying no for other people. Like the thing that creates limitations, I
Yeah.
should say, the thing that blocks you is you say no on behalf of someone else. You don't even ask.
Yeah.
I'm not requesting that promotion. I probably don't deserve it. How do you know? You're stuck in your head all day. You can't see what you're doing,
Yeah.
right? Like you can't, no matter how big your eyes are, you can't see your ears. Like you don't know what you look like to other people.
Yes, absolutely.
So you have no idea if you deserve that promotion or not, especially if you're spending a lot of time in shame. Like it's going to be something that comes from outside, or I don't want to ask this person. I don't want to do this thing. I don't want to take this leap. You say no in advance. You say no for other people. You don't even try because you're scared you're going to feel ashamed if you get a no. And one of the assignments I will sometimes give people is I want you to get 10 rejections across the board, something. Get 10 rejections, then we're going to celebrate. And it is amazing when you start doing that as a goal. You're not allowed to purposely get rejected. But go for something that you think you might get rejected for and give it your all.
Yeah.
And it takes people forever to complete this assignment.
Yeah.
Because when you start asking and giving it your all, you will be amazed how many of the things that you had already written off in your head are available to you.
Yeah.
And some of it is being able to have that somatic conversation of, you know what? Like, I believe that you're scared. It's okay that you're scared. This is why I want to do this. Can we go forward together? And it's like you bring your inner child on this journey with you to try something new. And it's so exciting. It's like when a kid doesn't want to go on a roller coaster. They're like, no, 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 no. And then they finally are like, well, let's try it. We'll try it once and we never have to do it again.
Yeah.
Right. And not every kid, but most kids have come off that roller coaster like, when can we go again? Right. Like it's so exciting, but it's scary first. And if you only listen to the fear, you're never getting anywhere. But if you let yourself try something new, do something that's scary, bring the kid along with you, you will be amazed at what opens up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking as you're talking, going back to that earlier point about how shame links to that fear of not being lovable. And of course, rejection links to that fear of not being lovable. So it makes perfect sense. That sort of makes a perfect circle for me in my head now as to how shame, rejection, not being lovable all kind of link together and actually put the brakes on what you might want to achieve. And like you were saying earlier, you think that it's the best thing for you. You know that it's the best thing to do, but yet there's still something that's stopping you from actually doing it. I see this a lot with people in business. They know that what they need to do, but they can't actually do it because something is getting in the way of actually taking the steps. So I love that challenge of getting 10 no's or 10 rejections to kind of move everything forwards in that way. So when you meet people who feel stuck or trapped by their experiences of shame, what would be your number one piece of advice to them?
If you're feeling really stuck, I was like, I want to make sure I have a good answer to this because there's so many things floating through my head. But if you're really stuck, if you're really trapped, I think it's take a teeny tiny baby step. Because shame, like I said at the beginning, is a stopping emotion. It is designed to physically stop you from moving forward. Taking one tiny step, one very little thing can help break you out of that freeze.
Yeah.
It does not have to be a leap of faith. Sometimes it's a tiny shift.
And then when you've taken one little step, you just take another little step. And before you know it, you've done the equivalent of a giant leap forwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. And if you could share one piece of advice with your younger self, what would that have been? Or what would that be?
I think that it's okay to feel the feeling. Like I definitely identify as sensitive, and looking back, like being sensitive is not a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're often taught, I'm going to say particularly as women, but both all genders as well. But we're often taught that emotions and feelings can be scary and you should just get rid of them and move forwards. And so relearning that actually emotions are a really important part of who we are and a really good signpost to help us in taking each step as to, what am I feeling here? What am I thinking about? What's my body? How is my body reacting to any set of circumstances? And, what do I need to do next? So, yeah, I think that's absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for everything that you've shared today. I knew I was going to love this conversation, and I feel really inspired by what you've shared with us and the really sort of practical ways that we can identify, notice, and then sort of take little tiny steps out through our shame to actually help us get to the place where we know that we want to be, even if we're putting the brakes on ourselves at the moment. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And I have so enjoyed this conversation.
Same. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you for listening to this episode of Becoming Unapologetically Me. Make sure you subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts so you never miss an episode.